good to see everyone out this morning. I know we have a lot sick. We've had some pretty crazy weather. It's times like these we can, take to heart some things. You can really reflect on passages that are very meaningful to you or really reflect the state that you're in. So I just wanted to share one before we begin this morning. This verse came to mind this past week while we've been dealing with the weather. In Kings 1:1, it says, "Now David was old and advanced in age, and they covered him with garments, but he could not keep warm." I'm sure there's a lot of you who feel the same way this morning. If we look at the calendar, we can see it is Christmas, but it's also approaching the end of the year. A lot of times when we get to this point of the year, we like to reflect on things, like to see where we were at the beginning of this year and how things have changed. We also look forward to the future, and we think about the changes that are ahead of us. But as humans and humanity, when we are confronted with change head on, we are really resistant to that. We think about how much we try to fight change, we try to fight things happening. We like to be in our comfort spot. And I think even more so as Christians, we are notorious for resisting change. We don't want things to be different. We like things just the way that they are. Paul talked to the Lord's Supper this morning about this idea of a checkbox. We don't want things to change. We know everything's predictable when we come and we sit on the pew on Sunday morning. And we really don't want to deviate from that whatsoever. But this morning, I would like to take a few moments to talk about change and really why we should embrace change. Heraclitus said, "You can't step in the same river twice." Pocahontas also did in 1995, but it was taken from Heraclitus. The idea here is that the concept is that things are constantly changing. Nothing is going to be the same. When you step in the river, it's not the same river you stepped in years ago. It's different water. It's a different thing going on there. And that's what the world is. The world has changed. Things are constantly changing. If you kind of look at this raging river I have on the background of the PowerPoint here, you can try to stand there and say you're going to refuse to move with it, but it's going to move you whether you want to or not. And that kind of goes with the concept of we're either going forward or we're going backward. If we stick to changing and we say we're not going to move, things aren't going to be different, one thing's going to happen or the other. It's a scriptural idea, right? God tells us we're either moving forward or backwards. So today I want to talk to you about change and how really we want to talk about change and the fact that we want to keep moving forward. And while we talk about change, we also should address the fact that there are some things that don't change. I started writing out a list and then I decided to stop because I was going to be worried that I would forget one and someone would be like, "Oh, you forgot this one thing." But let's just understand, there are things that do not change. And really, when we think about the things that do not change, we can think about Malachi 3:6. There he says, "For I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore you, the sons of Jacob, have not come to an end." God does not change. His principles do not change. What he expects of us does not change. Or we have James 1, verse 17. It says, "Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow." It's the same God. It's the same person. We have the same expectations that when we were given our instructions. When we were given the Bible, when it was written, it's the same exact information. And that is the foundation we build our faith upon. We think about the wise man who builds his house upon the rock. Why does he do that? Because the foundation does not change. The foundation of our faith does not change, but everything around us changes. In fact, I would say that change is fundamental to a Christian. To our way of life, to our walk with God, change is fundamental. And first we can look at it by, there was a change in the law. Hebrews 7, verse 12, the writer says, "For when there is a change in priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well." If there was no change, we'd still be held to the Old Testament standard. But there was a change. There was a change of covenant that still stands. It was an example given for us in the Old Testament. We do have that change. There was a change in the law when Christ came to fulfill the old law. But also there's a change in ourselves. And when there's supposed to be a change in ourselves. We're going to start in Hebrews chapter 4. This is a kind of a long reading. It's on 2 slides here. Beginning in verse 17. Now this I say and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do. In the futility of their minds they are darkened in their understanding, alienating the life of God because of the ignorance that is from them. Due to the hardness of their hearts they become callous, and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice of every kind of impurity. But that is not the way you learned Christ. Assuming that you have not heard about him, you were taught in him, as the truth is in Jesus, to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life, and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created in the likeness of God, and in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. And do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give it no opportunity to the devil. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that ye may have something to share with anyone in need. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth, but only such as is good for building up, as it fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander to be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. I know this was a long reading, but he's really showing this example of that there's a change that needs to be made in our lives. We were once sinners. We were once doing sinful things. And we make a change in our lives. Change is necessary. Change is necessary for us to obey the gospel. We can't be who we were before that. And then there's going to be a final change as well. 1 Corinthians 15, 50 through 53. I tell you this, brothers, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit imperishable. Behold, I tell you a mystery. You shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised, imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable body must put on imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. The hope that we have, the future that we have, the eternal life we have, requires some change. It's not going to be this life. We don't exactly know. We have some ideas of what heaven will be, but it's not this. It's going to be a change. That's why it's a fundamental aspect of our lives. We have to accept that this is what we have here isn't going to stay forever. And that's really explicitly said multiple times in the gospel, that this world will pass away. There's going to become a change that happens. But as much as we see this and we see this imagery of change, we still fight it, and we still want to resist it. And I encourage you that you don't let tradition get in the way of progress. What do I mean by this? Well, if we first turn to Colossians chapter 2 and verse 8. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy, empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. So we have human traditions. We hold on to these things. Paul's talking about this here in Colossians, but if we look at this, I think that we can, if we truly examine our lives, we are more guilty of this passage than we want to admit. We hold on to human traditions. We hold on to things that we prefer rather than looking for progress and looking to glorify God. So I have a couple examples that I want you to think about here this morning of how we can hold on to tradition, so focus on tradition that cause us to be distracted or to be led away. I think the first one's a pretty simple example. And it's a change in the order of service. Paul, again, when he was at the Lord's Supper, talking about check boxes. We come together on Sunday morning. We say, all right, class is going to start at 10. It's going to end 10:45-ish. Then we're going to pick up with the worship service, and then we're going to have X many songs, and we're going to have the Lord's Supper, and the speaker's going to talk for X amount of time, right? And then the preacher's going to go and hopefully only talk for X amount of time. And really, I know personally as a song leader that really they're the ones who often get the blame of this change in order of the service. But what I think is a problem is that sometimes, a change in the order of service isn't just haphazard most of the time. It's to accomplish something. Hopefully it is to accomplish something. But we are so rigid in our mindset that a slight change and variation of a process that we do here, we just completely lose focus. We think about how different it was rather than the message that we're trying to accomplish. On how we deviated from the norm, how the song leader sang one too many songs this morning, not what was the message of the lesson, right? The preacher went long, not what was the message being presented. And we so much distract ourselves from the godliness of why we're here. We need to examine and think about why we are here. We can hold on and say, do you know what, I think that, the preacher needs to speak X amount of time on Sunday morning. And we want to hold fast to that. If they were too short, which I don't think anyone ever complains about, or they were too long, and they're not thinking about the fact that we are here to remember Christ. We are here to remember his sacrifice. And we take this time also to have an opportunity to study the Word together. That's an opportunity that we have made available for everyone here. But we're not thinking about that. We're not thinking about Christ's sacrifice if we're thinking about the preacher going long. We're not thinking about Christ's sacrifice if the PowerPoint gets messed up somehow, right? We are thinking about everything else other than God. The other way we can, hold on to traditions in this way, and we could really spend all morning talking about traditional thinking that gets in the way of progress. I just wanted to give these two examples here. Is how we try to classify items. I hear this a lot. We either say, well, that's a camp song, so we're not going to sing that. Or that's a Sunday morning lesson, not a Sunday night lesson, which we don't have here, but when we did. Or, that's that topic, we're not going to talk about that on Sunday morning. And why do we classify these items? Is it the Word or isn't it? Why do we have these distinctions here? Because if we're going to say that the gospel needs to be preached, then we should preach the gospel. Now, I could understand if you're going to say, well, was it said appropriately or not? Was this lesson conveyed in a manner that was appropriate for the time? But that's not really what we do. I think that we should, if that is an issue and that it wasn't an appropriate approach, we talk about how that it could be done in a better way. We're taught that we should speak and be tactful in our messaging. That it's not that something's off limits, but how we present the information should be used to grow. So, and there are times, of course, we say, oh, there are camp songs, and you can sing those songs at camp. I've heard that a lot from many people. Really, I think what it comes down to is there's an appropriate time for those songs, yes, and normally it's, you have the people who can sing them. Not they only belong in this category with this group of people, because they are either appropriate for us to glorify God and praise or they aren't. And when we box things in characteristics, we're really saying, well, we don't want to do that here. You can go do that over there. That's holding on to traditions. That is saying, well, we aren't feeling comfortable with this here. We don't want to do that. And I think that can be problematic when we have that approach, especially when we're trying to we have new converts and things, and we're holding these things like this is why we do what we do. We do it because we're comfortable with it. This is because this is what we like. And Paul talks to the Galatians about this type of thing. Galatians 1, verses 6 through 10. I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are tuning to a different gospel. Not that there is another one, but that there is some who trouble you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. But even if we, or an angel from heaven, should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before now, so I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed. For am I seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. Here he's saying, the truth is the truth. You say that an angel come and gave it to you, that is wrong. And that's what I want you to think about, is that it's either appropriate or it isn't. Is it proclaiming the gospel? Is it praising God? Is it correct? Is it right to do or isn't it? We shouldn't be boxing these things. And I think that if we ask ourselves, are we just trying to please man? Did we not like the Sunday morning sermon because it stepped on our toes? And so we say, do you know what, that's not appropriate for Sunday morning. Or did we not like it because there was an issue? And I think that tone is an issue, and I think that there is some foundation for that of how we approach one another and speak to one another. But I think that if we just say, oh, this topic is reserved for X, that's a dangerous thing we find ourselves in, because X time just happens to never happen, right? It's like, oh, we can do that tomorrow, and tomorrow never comes. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. The next thing traditions do is they kind of cause this problem of putting an undue burden on someone. Colossians 2:16 through 23. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in question of food or drink or regard to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Let no one disqualify you, insisting on asceticism and the worship of angels and going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by sensuous mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with the growth that is from God. It is with Christ you in the world do submit to regulations, do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, referring to things that are perishable, according to the human precepts and teachings. These have indeed an appearance of wisdom, and promoting a self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the flock. But they have no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. If we really look at that last verse there is no value in putting undue burden on our brethren. And I think about this, and I think about these are the exact same failures that happened to the Pharisees. They wanted to add rules. They wanted to say, okay, well, we're going to stay so far away from the line as to stay safe as possible, and we're going to hold everyone to that standard, and we're going to put an undue burden on people. This word asceticism has come up now a couple times, and the definition is a severe self-discipline and avoidance of all forms of indulgence, typically for religious reasons. So Colossians here is talking about how there is no value to this. And I want to talk for a couple minutes here about why there's no value in it. First, I want you to think, for those of you who have grown up in the church and have been in the church for a long time, think about a lot of the church separations you've heard of. And a lot of the problems the infighting that has happened in churches. I think if you're honest with yourself, you realize that a lot of them don't come from doctrinal issues. They come from one person wanting to put an undue burden upon another person, and then camps forming. This is one of the dangers of asceticism, is we're going to be separating over non-doctrinal issues. I'm not sure how many people studied the Puritan culture in school. We had an entire, basically, segment on it where we were reading The Crucible and talking about Puritan life. And in the book, The Crucible, the premise of it is trying to speak about the fact that an exceedingly strict society breeds chaos. The reason why we don't have Puritans anymore, and Puritans are also the ones who have the likes of the speakers of Jonathan Edwards, who have a long, long sermon about sinners in the hands of an angry God, that We are only here by the grace of God, like he is holding us like a spider dangling over a fire. Yeah, that's pretty scary stuff. And they have this exceedingly strict society, and one thing just blows up the entire environment that they are in. The Salem witch trials, that's what the Crucible is about. They are just so strict that they want to say, you know what, we're just going to so avoid a problem that chaos ensues because someone, went, instead of getting in trouble, just started blaming other people for their problems. But I want to think about us as the church and how we will try to just go and we'll try to control every little thing. We will try to set these boundaries for items that don't necessarily need boundaries. We need teaching, and we need to understand the gospel and understand how to resist temptation. We don't need to make extra rules to stay away from the fire. We need to understand that the fire burns. If we think about a little child touching his hand on the stove, we just don't ever let the child not come into the kitchen. If the child burns his hand, he's going to learn that the stove is hot and to not touch it. But we are over here trying to control and prevent every bad thing from happening. And what ends up happening is that you have bubbles and you have all these protective shields around people, and one problem is going to sneak through that barrier, and they're not equipped to handle that problem, and they fall apart. We run into and say, how have people fallen away? So many of my friends, they say, they grew up in a good home. Their parents were, made sure that they were always on the right path. But the instant they had a whiff of freedom, that all fell down. I think we hold to our traditions and say, you know what, let's steer clear of all these things. We have to put a 10-foot wall around everything. And then we wonder why bad things happen because something's going to get over that wall. That's one way to look at it. There's another way also to look at this, and that's, what's our mindset of the gospel? When we think about what does the gospel mean, what does the gospel say? I was having a conversation with someone a while ago, and I said, what I've seen from my, fellow Christians growing up is that some of the people who fall away are having the wrong mindset of approaching the gospel. They're really approaching the gospel as an idea of thou shalt not, like the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not commit murder. Thou shalt not do all these things. Thou shalt not, and then the list just keeps piling up, and we add asceticism to it, and we say, you can't go there because, that might cause this problem. Don't do this thing because it might lead 10 steps down the road to another problem. And all of a sudden, the mindset is, I just can't do anything. We go and we try to put as many limitations on things as possible, and the mindset is, I can't do things. But that's not what the gospel message is. The gospel isn't thou shalt not, like the 10 Commandments. The gospel is teaching us that we need to love our brethren. The gospel is teaching us that we need to respect our brethren. We need to treat them well. And if we understand that, what's going to follow is we're not going to go do those bad things. We're not going to go steal from our brethren because we love our brother. But every time we add these things, we add extra steps and say, you know what, it's too risky, just stay even farther away, just don't do this, don't do this. We're putting undue burdens on growing and struggling Christians because we're holding them to a standard that they're not ready to adhere to. They may not understand. They're growing. And we have a lot of new Christians now who it's going to be hard for them to understand, maybe we know, we have some experience, but a part of growing is making mistakes. When we talk about the gospel, we talk about the fact that we're going to be baptized and then live faithfully. But we also have an understanding that we're going to make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes, we want to make them when they're small mistakes. That's why we oftentimes say we want kids to make mistakes when they're younger so that they don't make worse mistakes when they get older. But when we try to prevent mistakes from happening, we can just either get them into more trouble when they finally make a mistake, or we just make them feel just so overwhelmed that they can't do anything. I've become a Christian, but now I have 8 million rules, and I'm not really seeing these rules in the Bible, so I'm struggling, and they're trying to make, try to connect them, and that's a struggle. That's a struggle for a lot of young Christians. That's a struggle that I know a lot of people that fell away because of that, because people were holding them to things that weren't necessarily in the Scripture, but were just trying to avoid any future problems, and rather than try to explain the process of, well, we don't want a future problem later down the road, they just ridiculed them for going over the line that we drew, not the line of sin. I think the last reason asceticism is so dangerous is because when we use asceticism as our justification, when we're doing that maybe subconsciously, we're saying we're going to just stay far away from this line, we're going to put these undue burdens on people, it's very easy to misconstrue the asceticism of trying to stay clear with doctrine. In our mind, we're saying we're doing this because we're going to try to stay as pure as possible, so therefore it's a doctrinal issue. And some of the times I think about that when you get into a discussion about a topic, if someone ever gets backed into a corner, you're trying to say what you're saying isn't right. Like, if you follow it down a logical conclusion, what you are presenting is not factual, and then they'll say, well, it's better to be safe than sorry. It's better to be safe than sorry. You're going to press an issue that has some flaw somewhere, and you're going to fall back on, it's better to be safe than sorry, which is going to cause someone an unnecessary headache, and it's not being honest. If you say, oh, it's better safe than sorry, I think you should really consider if it's just you trying to stay clear of an issue and say, do you know what, this is my personal belief, so this is what it is, or are you really going to keep continuing to try to push that issue and say, well, this is doctrine? And I think a lot of times we have brethren who want to push things that aren't necessarily doctrinal, but they think it is because they have just been programmed to, traditionally we've done this to stay far away from it, so let's just keep clear and hold everyone to it. Don't let tradition get in the way of progress, because times they are a-changing. Times are changing. When we say that phrase, a lot of people love to turn to Ecclesiastes 1, 9 through 10. It says, what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which it is said, see, this it is new? It has already been in the ages before us. Now, I'll admit it seems a little interesting that I say times are changing and I pull this verse up, but I want you to think about what this verse is actually talking about. When we talk about things that don't change, one of the things that doesn't change is sin. Sin is a problem. Sin is a problem the first century as it is right now. And the actual sins themselves haven't changed either. But what is changing? Our needs are changing. We can think about, this verse is talking about, see, this is new. But in reality, what the world is like now is still different than the world was 20 years ago. There are new challenges, there are new obstacles. For those people, it might not be new challenges and new obstacles that have sprung up, but they are the new ones in the forefront that we need to be ready to battle. When we say times are changing, we can think about it as our needs are changing. What we need is changing. Our strengths and weaknesses, the things that we struggle with now, might be a different set of temptations that they were 20 years ago. The society we have now has normalized a lot of things that weren't normal 20, 40 years ago. And our traditions, I don't think, have equipped us as best as they could for changing times and changing needs and demands for our young Christians. I have two examples here. Homosexuality. homosexuality. First we're going to go think about Ecclesiastes 9:1-9-10. Is homosexuality new? No. I think that it was probably as prevalent in the Roman era as it is now. But why weren't we prepared for that battle with society? Why did we lose that battle? Because I think, if we're honest with ourselves, there was a battle, there was a freeze point where we could have made an impact on a society, and we lost. And you can say, oh, the world just, it just is just going to get bad. That the message just didn't work. And I say to that, it's not the message, because the message will always work. It's the thing that doesn't change, it's the messengers. Who we are and how we present the message determines the outcome. We think about how the church handled homosexuality. We think about people who say, do you know what? You weren't born with it, it's a choice. No nuance, no thinking about the person, just, do you know what? It was a problem that you just can't control yourself. And do you know what? I mean, you're just whining about something, it's a ghost, right? And think about if we treated homosexuality like we treat all the other sins. Right? Homosexuality is a temptation just like any other sin. And for us to say, to try to fight semantics of the question of whether you were born that way or not, lost the argument for those who needed help. Because we all became sinners at some point for something. And we were too busy fighting what it means to be homosexual. Science will tell you that there is direct links for alcoholism in people if they have alcoholic parents. Why can't it be the same? Why can't it be that there is something in someone that causes them to have that temptation greater than others? Why did we refuse to accept that for so long? We all, I think, can reflect and say, do you know what? We all struggle with different temptations. Why did we blacklist the people who struggled with homosexuality? Why did we not try to help them just like we would try to help anybody else? We said, do you know what? You say you're born this way, that's not true, and put up a wall. And there are many Christians who did that. What about mental health? I would say mental health isn't new. But I know that there are some Christians that will tell you that you don't have depression. Depression's not real. You just need to pray more. You need to have more faith. Because they don't want to accept that it's a struggle for someone else. Our traditions and how we've been handling and our teaching and our edifying each other has not equipped us for that. We, I think, sometimes really don't understand the process of how the brain actually works. And you say, it's not depression, you just don't have faith. Well, science, which we have basically given up and thrown our hands up and said, well, we're just going to get out of the science world, Christians are. We're just going to basically say, oh, science is problematic because there are a bunch of non-Christians, instead of trying to put more Christians into science. We'll tell you that there is a chemical reaction that goes on in your brain that you maybe are not able to control. It has nothing to do with faith. It deals with seeking the proper help. And if these two things are an example, we could again go on all morning about this, aren't new challenges. Why does the church have a bad reputation for handling them in this day and age? I'm going to contend that our traditions and how we wanted to be complacent in our we wanted to talk about low-hanging fruits of many other sins, but we didn't want to tackle those as fervently as we should when we saw the battle coming, led us to be unprepared for these new challenges. I have two examples of how we can kind of imagine this. First, if you think about playing an instrument, I played an instrument for quite a while, still do on occasion. If I played the same thing every day for a year, I'd be really good at playing that one item, right? I'd be really good at it. I can handle that. You put something new in front of me, I'm unprepared for that challenge. Because I have just practiced this one thing I've so focused myself on one thing, one mindset, because it was comfortable, because I could do it, and I liked it, so I stuck with it. And I wasn't prepared. Or you can think about strategy games. I love board games. I love strategy games. You guys may as well. If you go and you play someone in a strategy game, and you say, do you know what? I know exactly what that person's going to do. You're going to have an answer for it every time. The devil has gone up against us repeatedly and knows what we're going to do. And they can change their strategy. He doesn't stay idle. He doesn't say, well, this isn't working, let's try again. He looks for new opportunities. And if we're not changing and adapting to the things that are attacking us, how society's changing, we're not being more aggressive on those things, we're going to not be able to handle the new challenges ahead of us. We can go and we can say, oh, do you know what, things are so much of a problem, we're just going to step back and just stay clear of all of that. Then a couple years down the road, we wonder how things got so bad. It's because we didn't fight, we didn't change our approach, our strategy for winning souls. There's a concept in game theory that talks about if two people are trying to have the same outcome, there's a certain expectation, right? Like if you look at chess, if both people are trying to win and they're both amazing at it, you know, they're probably going to end in a draw. They're going to end in a way that, you know, benefit, like it's going to break even. But I want you to think about what the devil's goal is and what our goal is. You know, we think about the battle and that we have already won, but the devil's plan is just to take as many people down with him as he can. That's a completely different strategy. It's trying to just cause people to stumble however they can. And I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in the things that we've done in the past and how we like them that we're not really thinking about how we can save people with the new ways people are falling away. These aren't new problems in the world, but they are new challenges for us. We haven't faced them. You know, if we think generations back, there was never this giant push for normalizing homosexuality in culture. Were we prepared for it? Were we prepared for that battle? Or were we comfortable where we were? We didn't think anything was going to happen, so we weren't equipped for the battle that was ahead. So to summarize this, it is easy to blame the world on the difficulties of spreading the gospel. It is easy to say, well, the world's just so bad. You know, it's not our fault, it's the world's fault. And I want you to think about what that actually means. You're saying it's the world's fault, but what you're actually saying is it's a problem with the message. The message just doesn't work like it used to. I think if we go back and think about the things that don't change, the gospel has the ability to change lives. That's never stopped. It's not the message, it's the messenger. Paul talks about the idea of not disqualifying ourselves when presenting the gospel. And that's the main principle he's talking about. He's talking about keeping your conduct honorable among the Gentiles. And I think one of those things has to do with what is the church known for? When we think about the world, what does the world view the church as? And if we dig down deep into ourselves, we see that there's some truth in that. They say, oh, they're nothing but a bunch of traditionalists. And you can say, well, it's the gospel, and that the gospel doesn't change. But I'll tell you that there are people who will fight about traditions harder than they will fight about the gospel. And that's the reputation that the church has in a lot of areas. The reputation of how the people act rather than the gospel itself. So I encourage you to not fall into the trap of the Pharisees and the asceticism. I want you to think about challenging and questioning, why do we do the things that we do? Look to see if there are changes that need to be made. If we say, oh, we're doing this because it's how it's always done, ask if a change could be beneficial. Look to see if a change would be beneficial. Our needs change. The Christians we have now are facing different struggles than the Christians 20 years ago. Do we need to do something to help prepare ourselves in a different way? one of the things, watch a lot of cartoons and, a lot of superhero movies and stuff like that, right? The bad guy always gets more powerful, but so does the good guy, right? They both power up, right? And the good guy hopefully is going to be stronger than the bad guy. But I think sometimes when we are so resistant to changing our approach, when we're so resistant to accepting that changes need to be made, we say, you know what, this is how things have always been done, why break it, right? Don't fix it if it isn't broke. But it is broke, we just don't realize it yet. Mark Twain once said, it's not what you don't know that will hurt you, but it's something you know for absolutely sure, but isn't true. I want us to think about those things. Think about how we're going into a new year. How can we change things to be better? Finally, embrace the change of your life. We offer this time now as tradition for a time to obey the gospel. But I think we all know that just a couple weeks ago, we were all out in the foyer talking and someone was ready then too. We offer this time now, but it is at any time. Maybe it's time for you to start your walk, make a change, put on the new man. Or maybe you've fallen back into that old life. We offer this time now as a means to be able to make it right, that we can be here to help one another. If there's any need that you have from the church, we're more than happy to help you. Just please let it be known as we stand and sing.